So you are based in Boston, and it's a city that is full of schools of architecture, and I guess full of professionals. At the same time, it seems to me a city that is almost finished. I don't know how it's like or very different to New York or other American cities.
It's a really good question. I mean, I think Boston isn't finished only because the global real estate market desperately wants to come and develop as much as can be justified. And there are tracts of the waterfront that are being repositioned from kind of industrial to, kind of this kind of global real estate that in any high value city. I also think that like New Orleans, Boston has diverse neighborhoods, some of which, like New Orleans, are relatively low densities and or because of urban renewal were hollowed out a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I think there's more room for kind of intelligent growth in Boston than I think than people imagine from other parts of the country. But certainly not like Detroit where we work. I mean, where it's a very constricted city. In that way, it's probably more like a European city, I think, in terms of what the possibilities are. I mean, like New Orleans too, Boston is at high risk of sea level rise. And that's another fundamental challenge that the city is facing, and the planners and the urban designers about what can happen at the kind of property scale, and then ultimately what kind of infrastructure is going to be required. We're designing life to 2070, and the idea of that is that between now and 2070, there'll be more systemic solutions that are possible. So I think in that way, I mean, New Orleans feels very comfortable to me as a city. Mm-hmm. The scale, the neighborhoods, the water, I guess.
So you teach at Northeastern.
That's
so you
right.
are an associate professor at Northeastern.
That's right.
And you have a practice.
Yes, both.
That is a very substantial practice.
Yeah.
And why you have this double identity? What for?
I think that it's a good question. I mean, what I do in practice and what I do at school, to me, is one intellectual project. Like I don't distinguish between the two. And so, for me personally, there's a fruitful exchange of problems arise in practice. I wish there was more of a research component. Convert that to a studio, learn things, and then take that back to practice. But I think the students understand and appreciate that too. And anyway, Northeastern, it's very focused on what the school calls experiential learning. It's got a co-op program that's required for undergraduates. So undergraduates have to take 2 6-month co-ops outside of the university, really have jobs. Mm-hmm. And so that interchange between practice and pedagogy and research at the university versus research in practice is embraced anyway by the university. I also think it's just, I've been teaching since 1992, and I started teaching at Northeastern exactly the same month that I founded my firm, so in 2002. So that trajectory has been very parallel. It's an older model of academics in North America, the kind of practicing professor that you don't see as much anymore because the PhD path is typically the path now to get a tenure position in university. So I like to tell people I'm like the dinosaur of this other kind of tenured professor.
We are a little bit more delayed in Spain because that was completely the model. Now we are maybe moving towards that more separated, but hopefully still the profession and the teaching are very much.
I think I think as programs become more and more dependent on full-time academics with PhDs, I think there's a larger question about what it means to be a professional school in a research university. I mean, there's a lot of teeth gnashing at Northeastern about that. It seems, in any professional department, right?
You are a kind of strange animal in the design academia in the US, no? How do you approach this differently to a public policy, a real estate?
I mean, it is true that we are unique. I mean, and which is why when we're pursuing there's a request for proposals and there's a project, and it lays there as an inert idea about how to do it. We always, when we respond to those, these are typically public agencies or quasi-public authorities, or is that we rewrite the script when we propose, and then invariably they want to talk to us because they are intrigued. And then if they say, "Oh yes, this is a much more interesting way to do it," then we get engaged. Mm-hmm. And so we compete against planning firms that maybe are more policy directed. Sometimes we compete with the tribe of new urbanists. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's a few firms we compete with nationally, but it's also very hard to work for me nationally because I have to. I teach on Mondays and Thursdays, so I have a very limited bandwidth. Direct flight. It's got to be 3 hours door to door. We have a whole rule set about what we're willing to pursue when it comes to projects like that. But we most of our work is in the Boston metro area, but we did a major planning project in Houston along the east sector of the Buffalo Bayou with Michael Van Wolkenberg's office. We did a master plan for Eastern Market in Detroit. We're doing the city of Pittsburgh's mobility vision plan now. Mm-hmm. So we're always looking for the clients who have some ambition to maybe recalibrate how things are done.
So this economic part, regulatory part, negotiations they are typically seen as the professional side of architecture, no?
Yeah.
And the one that somehow waters down architecture somehow. But you are taking this and bringing it back to the intellectual side of architecture, and actually your scholarly research is about.
I think the academy, for ideological reasons, is very uncomfortable when theorists, practitioners talk about how the market works and its insidious global impact on built form, which is ludicrous to me because that's precisely like knowing how that system works, who the actors are, their interests, the performance criteria that's set up, why a center core commercial building is a center core commercial building, is absolutely critical knowledge to be able to drop in and propose alternatives. You can't innovate naively. This is how I feel about this. And but a lot of faculties get very nervous when then it's perceived to be a professional practice course or pedagogy that is only training to go work for the big corporate firms to do better elevator cores or something. And I think as architectural theory through the cycles stays within the discipline, loops out and explores the world, retreats back to the discipline, loops back out and engages the world, there's usually a strong reaction, counter-reaction. Mm-hmm. It's partly generational, partly a kind of protectionism of faculties being against the outside world as the raison d'etre for existing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's an unhealthy division. It's very interesting because Charles Waldheim distinguishes between professional concerns and disciplinary concerns mm-hmm. as a way to not cross-contaminate the two. Yeah. But I think some aspects of the relationship between the market, building types, the production of buildings, are actually disciplinary concerns and not precisely or only professional concerns. The way to change the system is to understand the system, and that's a little bit hackneyed, but I truly believe that you need to speak the multiple languages of all of the actors that are involved with the future city: real estate developers, regulators, engineers, and it's important to understand their perspectives, usually monocultural perspectives on either rate of return or the speed by which cars can get through an intersection. But you need to understand those things so that you can argue for a denser set of metrics to make decisions. And it's empowering in a way.
This is a title of one of your writings: Speculative Development, Global Capital, and Market-Driven Building Types. What's an urban designer to do? Can you summarize what to do?
Yeah, that's my lecture tonight. So, but I think it has to do with understanding the rule sets. First of all, market-driven building types are fundamentally retroactively inevitable in terms of their morphologies. Like a double-loaded corridor with private rooms off of it, with egress stairs and an elevator, is irrefutably logical, right? And it's a building block for hospitals and apartment buildings. I think the market has since the Second World War perfected types through real estate metrics: net to gross, percentage of area to window wall. A whole set of metrics have shaped these things, and they're pretty hard to argue against. It makes sense that for a building that can change its uses over time, to put the elevators and the stairs in the middle and leave the perimeter as free as possible, right? And so I think that's the point of intellectual overlap, is understanding that we shouldn't be guilty about these things. Like, those are the buildings that developers do, but kind of wallowing in it, right? You kind of wade into the water and you say, those actually make a lot of sense. Like a single-loaded corridor apartment building, yields half the units off the circulation. That's a kind of a pure thought. So right, and so the question is, how far can the limits be pushed? And are there other typologically pure answers to the same question, that because architects do those buildings just follow the rules kind of dumbly, that maybe are undiscovered? Like, are there other ways to, are there other attributes to a building that doesn't have a center core but maybe on the ends, and then you get cross ventilation? Are there other criteria that can be put into the mix that are equally rational that might result in other kinds of building types? It's a much more impactful territory than doing little customized one-off houses for wealthy people. It is a political position, actually, because of a global real estate investment trust set the standards for real estate across the globe now. This is kind of an emergency the way that rising sea levels is, right? Conventions have been so dumbed down so that real estate can be a commodity. The types have been commodified so that they can be traded on the open market. And so an office building in Abu Dhabi is exactly the same as an office building on the waterfront in Boston, identical, because the market wants that.
So there's an architectural and cultural urgency.
There's a kind of urgency there about why is it the same? Why is the International Building Code now the model code for the entire? It kind of makes all the buildings the same. So if you follow those logics, you get the same thing.
Thank you, Dean.
Okay.
We are looking forward to see and to hear you tonight. So thank you for coming to
Tulane
again.
Space.
This is unique.
Yeah.
Welcome.